Welcome back for episode 3 of Sundays in the Studio. So, today's episode is a little sad. It's something that we all have to deal with as artists, called failure. I had 3 sculptures in the kiln, and I had taken my time with them, let them dry, ran a few drying periods with the kiln, so much so that yesterday I turned the kiln on for a really long preheat, and even before I started, midway through the preheat, there was no steam coming out of the kiln. So I was like, well, this is gonna go pretty good. Problem is, it didn't go so good. Pieces exploded, which happens. It's not always something you want to see when you open up the kiln and go take a quick peek, and of course you're already nervous. You're like, and you take a quick peek and you see a crack in your head, an arm that had just popped off, and not really popped off, kind of like exploded. And you know exactly where your mistakes were. It was too thick, too much steam, piece goes boom. Yes, I checked, made sure, held my bottle up. No steam was coming out when it was at 200, 212, 250, even 400 degrees in the kiln. There was still no steam coming out. And I think what happened, truthfully, is I know they were thick. I know I was pushing limits with the clay. Trying to be a little sneaky, trying to get around it a little bit. I got caught up on it. And it was also, I think the majority of it, though, was as the piece was getting around 500 degrees, the kiln air temperature was getting around 500 degrees, the inner part of the piece was finally reaching and sealing off on the exterior, going through this quartz inversion, and the piece just went boom. So I got 3 sculptures I'm going to remake because I don't let failure stop me. Now, to prevent this on the next set of pieces I'm working on, I'm going through and I'm doing something with this drill bit. I'm actually taking the drill bit and drilling into the clay from the inside to create a series, more than a series, of 1,000 dots, 1,000 holes in the piece on the inside to help give the clay, well, number one, to help lighten it up, thin it out, but also to give the moisture more areas to escape. It's something I did on previous sculptures, and since I've just been getting back into really working on sculptures, and in this case I'm even getting to the point of working bigger, working larger, putting in many more hours into each piece. It's something I should have done on the previous pieces, but I didn't. And I suffered for it. Exploded pieces. Can't show them to you. Kiln's still a little too warm. It'll be all right. It is what it is. But that's the topic of today's Studio in the Sunday: failure. I have found that failure is my biggest teacher. It lets me know what I need to know. So I'm learning, and you're never too old to learn from failure. It's just one of those things, we and I hate to say it, but I think we've become too afraid of failure. I see a lot in my students, everything is either got to be perfect, they got to know exactly what's going to happen, or they don't want to do it. They don't want to experiment because they're afraid of failure, because failure is bad. They've been taught failure is a horrible thing. And I don't think failure is a horrible thing. I think failure is actually a great thing. Because failure lets you know that you've pushed limits. And if you analyze your failure, you will learn so much more from it than if everything is perfect. So I try not to be scared of failure. It happens. Thanks there, Telly Teal. I mean, it happens. You know, it's just, I mean, I've been doing this long enough. I know when it's going to, failure is just one of the things. But, what's that, Jim? Humility via failure has to be one of the domain of service. It is. Oh, man. It definitely makes you humble. And, if you're not willing to learn from the failure, though, that's the key, is being willing, being open to learn. Find out where your mistakes were. What did you do? Now, I come at this probably from a standpoint a little bit different than most people, because I also have learned to learn from failures of others. In a previous life, I was a scuba diver. I was a dive instructor, and we used to do things that were beyond the limits of what was called recreational diving. It's called technical diving. And one of the things that we were always taught, and that we always taught while we were teaching, was to examine the situation. So if something happened, like on a dive, and you read the accident report, you go through and you find where the mistakes were made. And I'm reading the accident report in my kiln, and I'm going, well, I know where the mistakes were made. Luckily, in these failures, I'm out some clay. I still get to live. And that's it. Failure. Just I love failure because I know I'm pushing limits. I know I'm learning from it. And it also pushes me back to things that, I skimped out. If I hadn't skimped out on just taking my time with this tool, even though I'd already put in 10, 20 hours on some of these pieces, 25 hours on some of them. If I had just taken an extra hour, or 2 hours, and thinned it out, did what I know works, I wouldn't have 3 pieces sitting in the kiln that are going to have to, one might be savable, the other 2 definitely going to get the hammer, and I may do some other things with them, but they're probably definitely getting the hammer. But failure today. So learning from the failure. How do we learn from the failure? Well, if we know that our clay is going to be thick, and it's going to take forever to dry anyways, thin it out. Now, there's ways to do it. Use a tool, carve down into it. This piece isn't too thick. We'll bring this camera over a little bit so you can see. The piece isn't too thick, but it does have areas which are thicker than other areas, because I've built up, of course, surface decorations on the outside. So, take this in here, bring it over just a little bit more, and you can see these little tiny holes that I'm drilling on the inside. They won't be seen, and they will help give the piece a way to dry. Give the clay, give the moisture escape routes. Now, what I'm doing here is I've got this particular tool, because I'm learning from my failure. I've got this set at 1/4 inch thick. I just took some, it's a simple drill bit. I just took some masking tape, went down over it, and I'm really just kind of drilling 1/4 inch. Some pieces I'm feeling on the backside, and I'm making sure I don't go too thick, too far in. But by even though I might have some pieces here that are closer to 1/2 inch thick, uh, by giving this multitude, this perforation on the inside, it will allow that steam, that moisture, that in the case of those pieces in there, the chemical water, more routes to escape, where it won't get trapped and want to explode. Now I'm also going to make an adjustment to my firing. So as I said before I blew them up, I ran 3 times. I ran that kiln for 10 hours, a hold of 10 hours at 180 and 190 degrees, keeping it below 212, where of course the physical water would steam and cause the piece to explode, to get them drier. I mean, they were dry when I put them in, but I wanted to make sure. Now, that worked. That was good. That got the physical moisture, the majority of the physical. I mean, you could put your hand on the piece, and there was no difference between, the air temperature and the piece itself. You could tell there was no moisture on them or in them as far as like physical piece. They were total greenware. The problem came in the bisque fire portion. And I run a bisque fire. My general run is, it'll, after I do the hold at 200 degrees, I then go into a typical bisque fire run, which is about 250 degree rise per hour, hold at 500 degrees, and, for a few minutes, and then continue running. I know I now have to adjust that, and I'm going to adjust it. So next time that I fire this kiln with a set of sculptures in there, this kiln will probably run for over 24 hours. And to do that, it's going to take time. We got to get that moisture out. But I'm going to slow down the rate of temperature rise. So instead of my usual 150 to 500 per hour to 500 degrees and then 250, I'm going to probably slow it down to a rise of 50 degrees per hour. Again, giving the piece more time to get the moisture out. And in doing that, I'm then going to hold I'm thinking I'm going to hold for about 2 hours at 500 degrees to really kind of make sure that it's all over there. And of course, come out and check on it and watch it while it's doing that hold piece to hear if I hear any cracking or exploding. I can go, oh, but we can stop and move on with life, right? And then after that, go into, after that 2 hour hold at 500 degrees, go up to about 200 or 150 degrees an hour to 1,000. Rather, not 1,000 degrees. Yeah, well, we'll probably bring it right up to just below that first quartz inversion and hold there for an hour, maybe 2 hours, just again to give that clay. And at that point, we're going through quartz inversion, so we got some chemical moisture coming out. Give that clay that time, give that material that time to survive, to get out of the piece. Has to happen. I just, and so I've learned from my failure this morning not to do that again, because it's not going to be fun. If you have any suggestions, like you fire, yes, preheats are great. We love the preheats, but it's not just the preheat, it's not just the physical moisture, I don't think, especially on these pieces where there wasn't any feeling of that. So we're gonna hope that we don't blow these pieces up. Maybe I'll take a mold off of them in case it happens again. But that's today's topic. Have you got any big failures that have happened in the kiln or in any kind of art making? You know, it's one of those things. I find failure is one of those things not to be afraid of, to accept the failure and to learn from the failure. You know, and that's the thing, you have to learn from the failure. Yes, this is actually kind of boring to watch me just turn a drill bit. But it's got to happen. This is the part where you have to really, you know. And again, I knew I should have taken my drill bit. I've done this before in previous sculptures. Now, it's been a few years since I made anything of this thickness and not, you know, even close to these sizes. And so I just knew, and I was trying to be. I guess I was trying to be a little on the quick and dirty side, and I paid for it. So all of those people out there who, you know, you have a cup explode or fails that way, just realize, you know, your cup, you probably only had a few hours into it. You get a few, you get 60 hours into a piece, it makes a difference on the failure. So currently my sculptures are, these are all hand built. I do use my potter wheel a lot, and I have made many wheel thrown and altered pieces that became sculptures. But these are all hand built, because of the forms that I'm creating is not going to be as, it would be impossible to get some. I mean, it wouldn't be impossible. It'd be extremely difficult to throw them on the wheel to get these particular forms that I'm working with. These figurative pieces are not really for the potter's wheel as much. So, not saying that you can't, but the amount of details, the size I'm working with also makes using the wheel to start a hindrance more than a help. What I like to do to actually begin these particular sculptures is do and I just took this all out, do a armature made out of brown paper to get my general shape down, and then I build the clay on top of that, which works wonders for what I want. It makes it go a little bit faster too. But yeah, no, these are all hand built, and yes, I suffered failure. Now I really don't want this stomach piece to explode, because it's it's got even more hours in it than the others did. I think I'm working on, I think this is week number 3 of working on this particular piece. So I really want to make sure I don't blow things up, because that would just be bad. I would be very sad. But if it does happen, yeah, life goes on, right? So learn from the failures. I did learn from my failure here. Had to take a step back and realize some things we can't totally skimp out. It also did make me think that I may even change up my clay body that I'm using here to give myself a greater chance at success with these bigger sculptures. And that's going to be I most likely will switch to using what's called a paper clay, which is a combination of paper, go figure, and clay. The paper fibers get mixed into the clay bodies themselves, and then you you're able to do a lot with them. What's great about paper clay is being that it is paper fibers in there that end up burning out. It gives you a lighter piece, but it also gives you it gives a lot more grain wear strength, as we like to call it. So that will actually probably be where I'm going to next, is in my sculpture aspect here, to help minimize my failure, which today's topic is, of course, failure, as we have already figured out, in the firing of them and even in the construction of them, even changing my clay body, right? So, when you're pushing the limits, I started with what I had on hand, and I love what I have on hand. And I'm looking at it and going, yeah, this may work, and it may not. And so we're going to hopefully find it working. As you can see, I'm just literally, this is the slow go. As you can see, I've got lots of perforations in here, trying to put these, even if I'm only doing an 1/8 inch deep hole, depending on the thickness of the exterior of the piece, on this one, I'm trying to put them close enough together so that there's smaller bits, right? There's less distance for this moisture to go out. And with the paper clay, I may still have to do some of this, but if I switch to the paper clay, I will have to do less of it, because the moisture the paper fibers will leave air gaps, will leave holes, microscopic holes for the most part, within the clay, allowing more moisture to escape. And that's the thing, right? You just sometimes you're working a totally new style, and you may actually have to even change your materials. This is so much fun, right? To get your vision, to get your work to where you want, to get to follow that path, to make the piece work. And so, yeah, failure. Anybody got big stories about failure? I'm willing to listen to them. Or if you have any any ideas of a firing schedule that works for thick pieces, you can just, send that to me in my DM. I have an idea of what I'm going to do. Of course, I'm going to jump in. I'm going to do more research again and pull out my old notes from years ago, to figure out where I can make slight changes to minimize those explosions. And as I said earlier, I think I have some ideas of what I'm going to be doing on the firing process part, but won't really know until I do it, which means I'm going to end up having a couple more possible sacrifices to the kiln, and that's okay. That means just we'll analyze what happened there and see what's next, right? So don't be afraid of failure. It's okay. Even people who've been doing this for years and years and years and years still have failures. That's it. That's today's topic, failure. Hadn't planned on it being today's topic. I actually planned on today's topic being construction of the mouth on this piece, but the kiln let me know your best laid plans don't always work, and that is totally okay. Maybe I can yes, they and that explosion is exactly what happens from just thickness of clay. The thinner you make your piece, of course, the faster it dries, And the better, the easier it is for your moisture in the piece to actually exit without causing ruptures. You know, one thing that I have learned in working with clay is physics of steam. It expands 1,600 times. So it's great for making powerful engines and such, but it's really bad when it's contained and it's got nowhere to go, like in a clay. That's why steam engines explode if they don't have that. That's why you got to be careful with those Instapots. Make sure you don't have a clogged hole there. Oh, trying to find all these. This is the part where I gotta actually look. I can't even tell. I can't see what my hand is doing currently. But I know by feel where my fingers are, where my drill bit is, and where my previous hole was. I just move over to the next. Yeah, so that's today's day in the studio. Thinking about the failures and working to prevent more failures from happening. I still have more paper I've got to pull out of this neck. Got to figure out how I'm going to get it in. I may end up actually having to cut this piece open to remove the rest of the armature on it, which is going to be okay, because I can always put it back together. There we go. Failure. However, it is a beautiful day out, and I'm not going to freeze anymore, which is nice. This is it. I mean, this is the job. So if you ever want to get into making sculptures out of clay, get used to tiny drill bit. Well, not really tiny, 1/4 inch drill bit here. Or rather, that's a 7/16, I think it is. And drilling holes to give moisture pathways to exit. Maybe I probably should have just, made these out of clay and then pulled silicone or plaster molds off and pulled waxes out of them and just had them cast in metal. But I don't have that ability. Well, I have those abilities. I don't have that studio set up. Besides, I can do more with clay at this point than I can with metal. So that's where we're at. We are trying to, this is the fun part, lighten this piece up, give the clay lots of holes to give the moisture, lots of escape routes, so that we don't have the same failures that we had with the 3 pieces that are currently in the kiln. When it comes to ceramic making, suggestions, well, really depends on what you want to do. And if I'm making functional work, cups, bowls, mugs, plates, I am looking for a clay body personally that is going to do what we call vitrify at my, or get close to vitrification at my final temperature. And then I'm looking for glazes that will be able to, that are going to be functional glazes. They're not going to want to dry, crackle or shiver off the piece. Personal clays that I use Buffstone by Alligator Clay. This is Buffstone right here. It is a cone 10 clay body, which many people don't utilize. It does say it's a cone 6 to 10 clay body, but any clay that says it's cone 6 to 10 is a cone, really a cone 9 clay body or a cone 10 clay body, because the clay is not going to be vitrified at cone 10. which means if you put water in it, it will possibly seep through the piece, even though it has a glaze on it, right? And my issue with that is if it's seeping into the clay body itself, when you go to put it in a microwave and you heat it up, well, the pot itself gets hot. So for clays, I recommend finding clay bodies that you like the color of. I prefer buff stone. I like this buff pale color. White clays are excellent for making glazes. Really pop on them, especially like porcelains and such. But again, finding the clay for the firing temperature you're going to be doing. So if I'm going to be, I used to work in what is called cone 6 clay, and at that point I used clay bodies that were formulated for cone 6 and only cone 6. B-mix was a good one. I also used a porcelain clay by Standard at cone 6, which worked fantastic. It was the Grawling porcelain clay, not their knockoff porcelain clay. I think it was 3 something is the Grawling, and 231 was the it's more of just a white stoneware. It's not a porcelain. You can't get it translucent. So, find a clay body that works for what you're doing. If you're going to be doing more sculptural stuff, then you want something that's got heavier grog in it, or possibly even go to paper clay, because that makes your attachments easier, and it's going to make your piece overall be lighter. And being lighter means it's going to be thinner, which means it's not going to want to go boom in the kiln. Tool-wise, if I'm trimming or if I'm drawing into my clay, one of my favorite tools are the Bison tools. They are expensive, but they last forever as long as you don't drop them. Super sharp, and just make cutting clay, cutting at any stage of dryness just so nice. Kemper makes some nice tools. I do have some Kemper tools. One of my favorite tools is, of course, the rubber nipple. Keep them around. These are great for cleaning up joints on cups, creating texture, creating lines in clays. And they're just really wonderful. And this is a color shaper, and you can get them. They're actually made for watercolors. I prefer them to be a medium. The hard just needs to be too hard, and the soft is just too soft. All right, so for my work, I prefer the medium. And then really, rib tools. I like my wooden rib tools that I get from Colin Garrity Tools. He makes a fantastic. They're great shapes. They fit wonderful in the hand. In fact, here is a Colin Garrity knife tool. It's wonderful. I've been using it for quite a while, and it still has a great sharp edge on it as far as the tip goes. And they're easy to sand. They take care of. They don't cost an arm and a leg like some other wooden tools. Dolan tools, they work great. Like I say, for ones that I have to, that I end up reusing. I have a variety of tools, just depending on what it is. I like the Dirty Girls as far as for like my metal rib of death, as I like to call it. I think this is the Dirty Girls. No, this is Cheryl's Mud Tools. This is by Cheryl's Mud Tools. They make great ribs. Dirty Girls I use for my wire tool, and I use their bat system for throwing on the wheel. My potter's wheels I use a Scut and I use a Brent, both of which are amazing. I've used others, but those just happen to be the ones that I was able to get at the time, and I just, of course, love them. They've held up for years for me. So that's the variety of tools. But the biggest thing on like clay is to find one that is just going to work for the thing that you're doing. Hopefully that answers that. Well, I hope my sculpture comes out well too. Take care. Have a great Sunday. But that is it. I will be standing this piece up in just a second here. Maybe I just pick the camera up and let y'all see the top of it. So I'm gonna take this piece up, bring it over. As you can see, I already have cut out the mouth. I will be doing some more work on that mouth. But that's it. Failure, learn from your mistakes, learn from your failures. Examine them, right? Figure out what went wrong and how you can make it not go wrong next time. I learned my clay smacked me around a little bit. So that's the end of today's Sunday in the studio. Hopefully, like I say, if you have any comments, if you work with a lot of sculpture and you make big thick pieces, if you have a firing schedule that works well, let me know. Like I say, I'll be happy to take a look at it and use it. If not, that's okay. But if you have any failures of your own you want to talk about, what do they are? What do they look like? What did you learn from it, right? So go, be kind to each other, make something out of clay, and learn from your failures. Take care.